Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S20 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2025. Now, here's the thing I love about the Samsung Galaxy S20. It was one of those phones that Samsung made a couple of years ago, and it was a pretty groundbreaking phone. It brought a lot of firsts from Samsung. It removed some stuff, but I still think in a lot of ways, this phone, hardware-wise, gives the impression that it can still be a really good phone that can hang well with some of the major flagships that have came out. So let's go and see if that's still the case. Now, if you want to pick up this phone or some other phones I'd recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy S20, this phone originally came out back in 2020. So this was a very, very interesting device to say the least, because this was basically Samsung's kind of like next iteration of their Galaxy S10. Like, this was the successor of that phone, and I didn't think Samsung could do much better than the S10, and they ended up crushing it with this phone. So this device on the front was giving you a very nice 6.2-inch dynamic AMOLED display. Now, back then, this was easily, in my opinion, without a doubt, one of the best panels that Samsung had made. This thing was giving you 1200 nits of brightness, which is very, very good at the time, and it was giving you 120 Hz refresh rate. This was a massive, massive change. Being able to go from 60 Hz that the Galaxy S10 had to 120 Hz really made this phone feel and perform that much better. Because you have to remember, the Samsung before, they removed all that bezel and they gave us a hole punch display. They could have easily just kept a 60 Hz panel on this next one, but they ended up not doing that. Now, most of the competition at this point too was already giving you 90 Hz. Apple, took them another year to even give us 120 Hz, but with this phone, they knocked it out of the park. And I thought they really, really did a really good job with this particular phone on the front side. On the bottom, you were getting a USB Type-C port, and you were still getting a microSD card slot. Now, those things were massive. Being able to go through and get that type of capability on this phone is easily one of my favorite things going on for this type of device. Unfortunately, they did remove the headphone jack. Nowadays, totally okay, but at that moment, that was kind of an annoying thing. But I think they did a really good job here, because they went from basically, before they removed a lot of stuff at one point. They removed like the headphone jack and microSD card slot, but at least here they were still giving us, the microSD card slot for the most part, which was nice. So, in my personal opinion, that was a really nice thing. On the backside, you were getting the standard glass back on the back of this phone, which again looks and feels very, very good. You're also getting this triple camera setup on the backside as well. So once again, I loved having this triple camera setup. I thought it looked very, very good, and being able to go through and get this type of camera setup was amazing. We'll talk more about that in a second, because it was really one of the better cameras they've ever made at that moment. And when I look at the outside, this phone does actually hold up fairly well compared to a lot of the competition. The only things that this phone is kind of missing out on that a lot of phones have nowadays: one, the extra bright panel. Most phones now give you 2000 plus nits of brightness, so this thing does kind of lack there. Also, no frosted glass back. That is kind of a downside on this phone too, but it's still perfectly fine. Other than that, there's not really that much that this phone is missing out on. Actually, microSD card slot on this phone is what most phones miss out on nowadays. Now, from a price tag standpoint, this phone is giving you a phone that's about $200. It's pretty hard to beat that phone when you compare to basically just everything I just stated, but there might be some reasons why this phone might not be worth the price, so just kind of keep that in mind. But I would probably tell you this phone, from that particular standpoint, I would say looks very good for that price, which can be kind of deceiving a little bit, so kind of keep that in mind. Now, moving on to the camera side, this was another just major W that basically Samsung threw in here. So they gave us a triple camera setup on the backside. So for one, it was a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 64 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. On the front, a 10 megapixel wide angle lens. Now, here's the thing about this particular phone. As you can probably imagine, Samsung, this was one of the bigger upgrades they've ever made from one generation of phones to the other. The Galaxy S20 was still giving you 4K at 60 on the back and the front of this phone, which was, massive, but they were also giving us 8K resolution that we can film in on the back of this phone. This was, without a doubt, one of the biggest differences they gave us from one generation of software or one generation of hardware to the other. Being able for them to go and give us this type of capability was amazing. I don't even use 8K on an everyday basis, but that was still a very, very nice thing for them to give us. I love having 8K, and I do think if you are going to go through and pick up a phone, that is easily one of the better types of, situations to kind of put yourself in. So at least having a phone that gives you 8K is very cool. I love having that. And still to this day, there are still a lot of phones that cannot film in this resolution. Even the latest and greatest Apple device, their iPhone 16 Pro Max, that still cannot film in 8K resolution. Now, the average consumer is probably not going to care that much, but still, it is still a really nice type of thing to have, and this phone debuted with it, which was amazing. So from that side too, definitely gets a thumbs up from me. Now, on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here is the fact that this particular phone was also giving you software support for quite a bit of time. So, comparatively to all the other Samsung phones that came out at that time, it is what it is. This phone was basically giving you, 3 versions of Android at that time. So it started with Android 10, and it did go all the way up to Android 13. So not really too many versions of Android, if I'm being honest, but still it was good enough for the most part, right? So being able to go through and buy a phone like this means that this device was still good for a bit of time. You were still getting software support for a bit. So I think that was a nice thing. But again, this was not the longest supported phone of all time. But this is the reason why I probably wouldn't recommend buying this phone anymore. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to buy something like a Samsung Galaxy S20 anymore because you're already done getting software support. So what is the point of buying this type of phone if it's already done, right? That's kind of the situation we're at. So I look at this device nowadays and I'm like, you know what? It probably doesn't make a lot of sense to go and buy this phone because you're already done getting software support. So that's kind of how I feel. Although this phone holds up very well in a lot of other ways, the software support, it's already 2 years old. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to buy it from that perspective. And you're much better off buying devices that are still supported with software when it comes down to it. So from that side too, that kind of covers it up there. Finally, when it comes down to the performance, this device is giving you that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the chipset and the RAM mixed in with the way the display is set up with the 120Hz display, it makes this phone's performance feel that much better. This still feels like a pretty fast kind of phone. I think the battery life and other areas of this phone aren't that great anymore. In some ways the battery life, but man, this device still holds up pretty decently well from the performance side. If you wanted to, you could still kind of go through, pick up this phone and still feel like you're getting a decent performing device. There's still a lot of Android gaming handhelds that have came out that rival, that still have this type of chipset inside. So it's not even the most outdated type of chipset. I think it still kind of gives you some stuff that you would kind of expect from a device. So I think this in and of itself is another one of those really, really important things to keep in mind. So overall, when I look at the Samsung Galaxy S20, although this isn't the best device of all time, this thing is not perfect. There's definitely some issues going on with this type of device and all that. I think when I look at this phone, this really is one of those types of devices that I look at as probably being a very, very solid type of device. If this phone was 3 or 4 years, this was 3 years ago. Nowadays, it doesn't make a lot of sense to buy this phone because it's already outdated with software and there are better devices to go and buy. Even for $200, you could buy something like a Google Pixel 7. I think that would be a better device to buy than this thing. Think of phones like a Galaxy S23, a Google Pixel 8, an iPhone 14 Pro. Those phones are more expensive, but you're going to be getting a way better experience from those devices rather than this one. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out, Solden.